What kind of game do you get when you mix Hitman with Dishonored, sprinkle in some Dark Souls, toss in a dash of roguelite, and wrap it all up in a time loop narrative? This is how Deathloop was described to me prior to its launch, and all this did was confuse and scare me. It took actually getting my hands on the game to understand that Deathloop is so much simpler than even its own ideas. That sounded a bit like a backhanded compliment. I guess it kinda was. Hey there, welcome to episode 2 of our challenge review series. This time we're going to be taking a look at Deathloop, a game I'm sure many of you have heard of, but not nearly as many have actually played. Deathloop is a game that I avoided for a while just because I never really understood how the heck the game was supposed to work. At the time, all I really understood about the game was that your main objective was to kill a bunch of targets. While you were trying to do this, another player could invade you and try to kill you. Different NPCs would have different schedules depending on the time of day. And that was really it. From a gameplay perspective, at least. I didn't entirely understand how a day-night cycle would be handled, or how invasions would be balanced. And I was especially worried about how progression was tracked. With a concept like that, the game could last either 5 minutes or 5 days. One thing I knew for sure though, was that this game had a killer vibe and aesthetic to it. In any of the promotional material I saw, they never did the greatest job of explaining how the game was supposed to work. I was always left with more questions than answers. I decided, of course, we'd play the game anyways, and why not give it a kick? I wanted to see if you could beat the game without its namesake, without dying or looping.
Oh, lady, I have no idea. Oh, shit, that's not good.
You just hurry up already?
You can't, but you can beat the game in the minimum amount of loops without dying at all. Kind of. I needed some extra help for this challenge, and you'll be here shortly. Till then, let's set the game up for a second. Deathloop is the most recent vision from Arkane Studios, the developers behind Prey and Dishonored, among other things. If there's one thing Arkane is good at, it's innovation. They're one of the few game studios that still seems to strive for new innovations. From the spellcasting of Arx Fatalis and physics of Dark Messiah, to the level design of Dishonored and atmosphere of Prey, Arkane is a studio that has always shown its love for immersion and innovation in gaming. Deathloop is no exception to that. True to its namesake, the time-looping structure of Deathloop is designed to teach players about its world and characters while unlocking new opportunities and abilities with each loop. This ultimately makes each new loop feel like a different experience, while you strive to accomplish your ultimate goal of breaking the loop. The video games are the perfect medium for a time loop narrative, don't you think? Every time you die and load up your last save can be seen as its own time loop. Today, I figured we would put Arkane's design philosophy to the test here. They always seem to value player choice and freedom, so what if we chose to beat Deathloop without all the dying and looping they expect from us? Deathloop without the Deathloop. The game features 2 modes and 2 playable characters. The main story is Break the Loop, where you play as the plucky, charismatic, and kinda crazy Colt Vaughn. Colt serves as the game's main protagonist and suffers from amnesia. He sees floating words and talks to himself to a concerning degree.
So I'm really the only one saying these? How'd I get so lucky?
Yet he remains determined to accomplish his main goal of breaking the loop. In order to accomplish this, Colt discovers the LPP, which, well, actually, I'll let him cover this.
The Loop Preservation Protocol. A bunch of big words to make a simple point. I kill every visionary in one day, I break the loop. Period. I know where they spend time, but I'm guessing it won't be as easy as hunting them down. Good thing I'm one stubborn motherfucker.
And now you have the game's main premise. If Colt can assassinate all 8 targets in a single loop, the loop will break and Colt will be free. Ironically enough, Colt's one of the few characters that retains his memories from loop to loop, despite not being able to remember his own past, or his relationship to the game's main antagonist, Juliana Blake. Juliana is snarky, violent, and maybe a touch sadistic. She enjoys watching Colt suffer and is taunting him over the radio throughout the game. You get to play as her in the Protect the Loop mode, which sees you invading other players' games and trying to kill them. The story of Deathloop centers itself around these 2 characters. In fact, any other characters in the game hardly even matter when it comes to the main narrative. Sure, there's notes and emails you can read, which gives you some insight to the importance of the other visionaries, how the loop was created, all that kind of jazz. But the only two characters that drive the plot forward are Colt and Juliana. And Colt. Maybe Colt too. Also Cult to a lesser degree. Time loops, man. Crazy. But I do have to mention that those notes aren't just for world building. Some of them contain important information about Colt's past. Collecting them won't affect the story, but they'll give you a much deeper appreciation for it. It's just unfortunate that most of our character building is done through Colt talking to himself or through radio banter. Some of that banter between our main characters is just adorable, though.
Cameras
The
over
radio
or something.
tower tracks your position, and you always act so surprised, like I wouldn't know exactly where you're going.
I don't even know where I'm going.
Dorsey Square's just down the road cliffside. Let me guess, second floor?
Sounds like you're angling for an invite.
So you can show off your little beer tap again?
Different me. This Colt's done talking.
By the way, everyone recognizes your stupid jacket.
I like this jacket.
Remember all those game titles I threw at you in the beginning? Hitman, Dishonored, Dark Souls? That's because Deathloop does take some elements from those games. Your main goal is to kill 8 targets in one loop, and each target has a different schedule throughout different times of day. This is where the Hitman element comes into play. You may only have access to a target in the evening, or might have to choose between 2 targets in the morning. This is because of how the game handles time progression. There are 4 different zones in the game and 4 different times of day. Those being morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. Before heading out to a zone, you get to choose your loadout and what time of day you'd like to explore in. Different areas might open or close depending on the time of day, and each time you return from a zone, time will move forward to the next period. From morning to noon, noon to afternoon, you get the idea. Once it reaches past the evening, time loops back to the original morning, and progress is reset. Any targets you assassinated will come back to life, and any gear you obtained will disappear. There is a way to keep the gear and abilities you find, but for the most part, the only thing you retain from loop to loop is the information that you've learned, such as door codes. Because of all this, you have to plan your loop perfectly by tracking down leads. Leads are essentially your missions, telling you where to go, what to do, and when to do it if something is time sensitive. You might only be able to do something during the afternoon, for example, but only if you prevented something from happening in the morning. This makes each new loop feel much more unique and dynamic, because as you change certain events, different opportunities will open up to you. Visionary leads are your main missions, helping you track down the information you need to kill all targets in a single loop. You also have arsenal leads, which act as side missions to help you track down some sweet smoking iron to bulk up that loadout. On the topic of loadouts, you're probably wondering what you can do to keep your gear from loop to loop. To do that, we need to collect Residuum. Residuum can be collected from dead visionaries and random objects. Once you've completed the required arsenal lead, that is. You can then use Residuum to infuse any equipment you've obtained, and every time you start a new loop, you'll get back all your infused gear, even if you happen to drop it during your playthrough. The game gives you quite the arsenal too. Weapons vary in quality from crude to unique. Exemplar on unique weapons can come with random perks. I'm a big fan of the suppressor perk. Makes stealth stupid easy. You can also equip slabs, which give you different abilities. Reprise is equipped by default, and there's no way to remove it, although I'm not sure why you'd wanna. It gives you another chance if you die, as long as it's got a charge. Some of these slabs are abilities taken straight out of Dishonored, like Shift or Nexus. Aside from Reprise, you can equip 2 slabs at a time, but they can really change up your approach, whether you want to go balls to the wall with Havoc, or take a more subtle approach with Aether. The game accommodates multiple playstyles. I've always been a big fan of the stealth hacker playstyle. Using your trusty hackamajig, you can blind enemy cameras, or take control of their turrets. It always makes you feel like a crafty genius. On the other hand, going in guns blazing is super satisfying, and gunning down entire mobs of enemies just feels right. And of course, we can't forget the Souls-like invasion mechanic. Another player can invade your game as Juliana and attempt to hunt you down. She has a unique slab that lets her swap appearances with NPCs in order to trick Cult. These are the most intense moments that the game has to offer, since these invasions can happen at the worst times. If you'd rather not fight, just hack the antenna and escape through your tunnels. There's no shame in running or playing dirty when they're the ones that came looking for a fight. One online experience had me invaded at the complex in the evening. At this time, the complex doesn't have many enemies, but is littered with traps. Conveniently, I had an upgrade to my hackamajig that allowed me to turn all these traps against my enemies. I felt like a mad genius as I set up shop to watch the cacophony of explosions engulf the would-be invader. Really wish I got footage of that.
I feel like the best highlights of my casual playthrough were from these online invasion moments. But if you prefer to avoid these confrontations, you can just set yourself to offline mode. Juliana can still invade you, but she won't be controlled by another player. When Deathloop was announced, the first thing I took notice of was the game's style. I wasn't the only one. Deathloop won Best Art Direction at the 2021 Game Awards, and for damn good reason. The 1960s retro Cold War espionage theme, mixed with some sci-fi and time travel, that's some pretty cool stuff. Each location in the game feels distinct and changes with the time of day. Take Updom for example. At noon you can visit Charlie and play his conditioned detachment game. The area feels like some elaborate laser tag arena. In the evening, you can crash Alexis's party. Maybe head up the dance floor. It gives each location a unique theme during each time of day. I also have to give some praise to the gun sound effects. Weapons like the 4-pounder just sound so powerful, and they make you want to run in there and gun everything down. The music is kinda catchy too, and it fits well with the overall theme of the game.
Here comes a new challenger!
The challenge, as always, was a simple one. Beat Deathloop with as little Deathloop as possible. I said near the beginning that I need some extra help for this one, so let me explain.
Yeah, come in. What took you so long, man? You got the goods? Ah! Okay, thanks. Douche. This is what I'm talking about here. Some codes and instructions. In the game, there are these locked doors. Each locked door has its own unique code. Each code is randomly set at the beginning of your playthrough. But that's the thing. Each code is set at the beginning of your playthrough. Take a look at this.
Start your game and it'll create a save file for you. Locate that save file and go ahead and copy it. Now we've got 2 save files with door codes that'll be the exact same for each of them. Play through one of them to get all the codes, then overwrite it with the new save to play through the game with all the codes already there for us. Just make sure you write down all the codes you're going to need.
With these poorly scribbled instructions, we should be able to beat the game in the minimum loops, all without dying. I hope. Let's take a crack at it.
This will be spoilers, by the way. I'll keep descriptions brief, and just know that with this information alone, you won't be able to beat the game in the same way that I'm doing it. Your codes are going to be different, and I'm not going to explain where to get them. But if you want to avoid all spoilers, just skip to the next section. Time code in the description. When the game starts off, Colt is still trying to put together who he is and what the hell he's doing. This is when you come across the first locked door in the game. And the floating words tell Colt he already knows the code.
Son of a... I don't know any damn code. Yo, hello? What?
In a typical playthrough, you've got 2 options. Spend forever guessing random numbers, or go right. The problem with going right is that we die. But we will learn the code, and a little more about the story and our objective. Who needs that, right? If we already have the code, we can just go through the door. I was actually really expecting some special dialogue or something to happen here, but the game just kind of skips ahead a few steps like we already know what we're supposed to do next. A little unfortunate. Now the game is still in a handholdy type of tutorial mode, so even though we skipped a death, and thus a loop, we still can't beat the game on our current loop. We need to get the LPP, which is locked in a safe, and if we leave to go find the code, when we return to the safe later, the LPP will be gone, costing us a loop. But you guessed it, since we already have the code, we can skip that too, grabbing the LPP as soon as possible. Before we leave, Other Cult tells us to go check out Wenji's lab, and that's what we have to do. The game is trying to get us to complete the arsenal lead, Ubiquity, so that we can use Residium to infuse our gear. Personally, I don't think it's the greatest idea to let Colt get too attached to his guns. He needs to get out more.
Who's the super scientist now? Ah! You and me, baby. Together forever. At least until I break this loop. Well, what should I call you? Mr. Gun feels a bit, formal. Gunter. Gunnislav. Maybe the machine. Mini Colt. Nah, Colt Jr.? Now that has a ring to it. It's too self-involved. Colt the second. Yeah! Colt 2! Colt Square! Why the fuck am I naming this gun after me?
Actually, more important than that, we want to avoid deaths and loops as much as possible. Every death is also a loop, but not every loop is a death. Unfortunately, completing this side quest requires sacrifice. So, we can't do it. Thankfully, there is something else we need to do while we're here. So it's not a complete waste of a trip. All we need to do is get into Wenji's office, and thankfully, we already have the code. After grabbing the information we need, we skedaddle. Oh, and if you're wondering about these sweet guns I have, you get them for signing up with Arkane Outsiders and linking your accounts. You get to keep these guns as if they were infused, and if they're good enough for speedrunners, they're good enough for me. After that, we stop by Alexis's place to... I'll be honest, I don't remember what I needed from here. It's written down that I needed to do something here, I just got no clue what it was. Anyways, we then encounter the first mandatory loop. There's nothing else we can do on the first loop that would matter, so we jump into loop 2. On loop 2 we head to Updom and bring their mutt to 2-bit, then come back later and get the code to the rack hanger. We're now done with loop 2. For loop 3, I thought this could be our final loop. Instead, we spend the whole loop running around getting more codes for the rack. All codes related to the rack are voice codes, which Colt himself needs to know. You can try to shout the codes at him all you want. He ain't gonna hear you. Or at least, he ain't gonna listen. After that, we have to loop again, making 3 required loops so far. But the good news is that we're now on the final loop. We start our day making sure tonight's fireworks go off with a bang, popping by Harriet's to say hello on our way out. Then we give Igor a much-needed excuse to hit up the party tonight. I mean, Wenji's gonna be there. After that, we check in on the lovebirds, but being a third wheel is always kinda awkward, isn't it? We then catch up with a few friends at the party, making sure to really take in the sights. What a magical night. I was never too good at parties, so we pulled the old Irish goodbye. And the last thing we need to do is jump into the rack and finish the game. Yep. Just, hop on in. So, I was watching speedruns, and saw people clip into this area. And on my first challenge attempt, I was really banking on this. I thought I could save a loop by clipping through the wall. I tried to do this for way too damn long. I still have no clear idea if the glitch was patched or not. Eventually, I got desperate and tried to bargain with the door.
Test flight. Hardwire. Vixen. Deity. What's the name of that? Paradiddle. Guardiloop? What the fuck is a Guardiloop? Usurper. Analog. Test flight. Guardiloop? What the
So I ended up having to do the whole run over again, adding in that third loop where I got all the rack codes. But eventually, I did it. It took a couple attempts to get things right, but in the end, we managed to beat Deathloop in only 3 loops, without dying once. Not including the unavoidable story-related events. We didn't even have to use reprise. We could have cut it down to 2 loops if only they didn't fix the damn walls. We only needed the codes to 8 different things, not including the voice codes Colt needs to learn for the rack. I forgot to time how long this run took, probably because I had to do it over a few times, but a typical playthrough is between 10 to 20 hours, depending on how much you like to see and do. The challenge run was likely much shorter. There's also the multiplayer aspect, giving you a reason to keep playing the game after beating it. So let's go ahead and check out the leaderboard, shall we? I think it's fair to give Deathloop 3rd place on the leaderboard, earning it the rating of great. Level design is Arkane's bread and butter at this point. I mean, I still felt like the areas didn't live up to some of the fun and unique levels of Dishonored 2, but they're still great. I just wish the game provided more freedom with how you chose to assassinate the visionaries. It would add so much replayability if there were multiple ways to accomplish the game's main objective. I understand having only one clear way to kill them all helps ensure the player progresses through the narrative at the right pace, but the experience could have been much more freeform and unique. The game doesn't even react differently to your actions if you guess codes right and skip story sections, which is a completely possible scenario. Investigating and tracking down leads didn't feel so much like I was investigating anything, more like I was just following objectives on my HUD and completing mission tasks. I don't want to say Deathloop was lacking in content, since the game feels like it has a really good balance and anything else would just be padding on top. But I do kind of wish there was more reason to go back and play the game after beating it, because I had a lot of fun. Maybe different game modes or an expanded multiplayer where different cults could work together. I mean, the potential was there. But those are all my complaints, really. I adored the characters and themes. Guns and abilities felt very satisfying to use, and the multiplayer was a nice touch that added some intense palm-sweating anxiety into my playthroughs. All in all, a great game, and I recommend you check it out.
Things could have gone smoother, but we got it done. Minimum loops, no dying. Except for like that one unavoidable intro sequence. It's ultimately a fun and completely pointless challenge. I'm really not sure if this is something that would be used in speedruns, maybe just a universal save that everyone uses that all has the same codes. I'm not sure how much time it would save, but it would be kind of neat. If you were to do it yourself, you'd just have to play the game, and then wipe your progress, and then play the game again. If you haven't played Deathloop yourself, I recommend it. It was pretty fun. Don't let that time loop stuff confuse you too much. It's a simple game where you just run around and shoot things. Well, we're at the end now. If you enjoyed this video, thanks. It really does mean a lot. I appreciate you and everything you do. Ciao.